Welcome. Hi, I'm Mikki, and this is Mikkipedia, where I sit down and chat to doctors, professors, athletes, practitioners, and experts in their fields related to health, nutrition, fitness, and well-being. And I'm delighted that you're here. Hey everyone, it's Mikki here. You're listening to Mikkipedia, and this week on the podcast, I chat to Ryan O'Connor, optometrist and podcast host of the Stag Raw podcast. And we talk all about Ryan's interest in metabolic health and eye health. We discuss the risk factors for some commonly seen eye conditions, including glaucoma, retinopathy, age-related macular degeneration, AMD, and cataracts, and the relationship with metabolic health. And we talk about why it matters what we eat for our eye health. We also discuss protocols he suggests to help protect our eyes as we age, with some practical tips to support eye health, including supplements. In addition, we discuss how Ryan got interested in metabolic health and how it began around the time of a severe concussion that put him on the sidelines as an up-and-coming rugby player. So those of you unfamiliar with the Stag Raw podcast, of which I have been a guest, and Ryan has some great people on. Ryan is an optometrist by day in Hamilton and podcast host of, as I said, the Stag Raw podcast. And he likes to explore on the show what success means and how individuals from different backgrounds go about achieving it. As a practicing optometrist, his special interests are in behavioural optometry, sports vision, and traumatic brain injury recovery. His qualifications include a BSc in anatomy, neurology and reproduction, and a Bachelor of Optometry. Ryan is a keen sportsman with a long history in rugby, swimming, soccer, ultra running, and water polo, and is a keen outdoorsman as well, with 10 years experience exploring in and around New Zealand. You can find Ryan's personal blog at stagryan.com and also touch base with him at stagryan on Instagram. And it is well worth listening to his podcast. It is awesome. I learned a lot from Ryan with this discussion, so I really hope that you will too. Just before we hit go on the interview, I'd like to remind you the best way to support Mikkipedia is to click like and subscribe on your favourite podcast platform, and then tell your mates about it to increase the awareness of our show in the absolute massive field of podcasts that are out there. That would be amazing. All right, team, enjoy the conversation that I have with Ryan O'Connor. Ryan, you're the host of Stag Raw podcast, and which I, of course, had the honour of being a guest on, I believe maybe even a year or 18 months ago. Was it a while ago?
Earlier this year. Yeah,
really?
Yeah, around about March or something like that. Yeah.
Time feels like
You've
it's
done
some
a
sort
lot.
of vacuum. Do you know what? It was that post-COVID, I've got to go out and do all the things that we couldn't do when we were all locked down. I think I had a bit of that going on. But God, isn't it funny how time has that ability to feel like, each day sometimes feels incredibly long, yet you blink and months have passed.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So interesting. So anyway, you're the host of Stag Raw podcast, which is this awesome podcast based around health and wellness and speaking to experts, not only in that space as well, because I know that you're a keen sort of hunter and outdoorsman as well. And you're an optometrist by day.
That's right. Yeah. One or two.
Well, yeah. And so you've got this passion for health, well-being, and metabolism. And I wonder whether many people would be able to find the synergies between your day job and, of course, your passion and around metabolism, and, of course, how you are able to then bring information to people via your podcast. So how did you get into that area of metabolism or explore that within the context of eye health?
Yeah, I think it was just a culmination, really. Like, my dad was a physics teacher growing up, and my mum was a laboratory technician. So I remember at like 8 years old drawing bacteria on a slide, and I like left it in their office at work, and they ended up putting it on the fridge type stuff, and they're like, well, that was pretty cool. And just like hanging out in the science labs at James Harkis College in Invercargill, and just being like, oh yeah, what's this about? And Dad would have the odd experiments set up for their labs and stuff like that. So seeing physical things like that. So, and then at 12, I saw my brother get his eyes tested, and I was like, that's bloody cool. This is science, but a job, and you get to interact with people all day. So I think that's where the sciencey stuff came along. And I was like, right, how do you do that? You go to Auckland University, you get into optometry, you be an optometrist. Little did I realise that the sort of study the night before, do the practice exams that I'd done in NCA was not quite what was needed for a 40% weighted 50 multi-choice question in chemistry and I think human body systems. And I got 50% in, 49% in those, and went, oh shit, I've blown it in the first term of this thing. So I sort of had the next 3 terms of university to try work my ass off and figure out how to study, and knowing full well that I probably wasn't going to get into optometry. I got waitlisted at 26 and there was 52 spots, and they told me usually about half the people get into med and decline their offer. And so I found out on Waitangi Day that I hadn't got in, and then I had to make this decision, like, do I carry on with biomedical science, like human body systems and stuff? I really enjoyed reproduction, or do I just scrap it and go be an engineer like my older brother and go to Canterbury? And with a little bit of leeway of I'd met a girl over summer, I went to Dunedin instead and carried on. But biomedical science was reproduction and genetics, and I did well in anatomy and genetics and I was okay in biochemistry, but genetics was like a foreign language. And so I just like, right, I need the marks because I still want to be an optometrist. Went into anatomy, and in that third year, like I said, I'd done well in anatomy. They asked me to do research in preparation to maybe do honours, and I did neuroscience, reproduction, and cellular anatomy. So, I had this, and in the biochemistry and the genetics, had this sort of understanding of like super microscopic level, and then like going out to the broader thing. And in that third year, I did a bit of zoology, some neurophysiology, and sports nutrition, which I thought would have been easy because I was doing like pre-academy for rugby, and we're learning about coaching and protein and how to get bigger and all that sort of stuff. And like a couple of people in my anatomy class who were trying to get into medicine, who were very good sports people, we all just bombed the paper. We got like C's and thought, what did we do wrong?
Oh, mate, it's funny actually. And do you know what? Like, it's like when you were describing your first year of university, you sort of pretty much described probably 60% of those who go to university, their experience. You seem to get pretty far on quote unquote natural ability. Some people, and then you sort of just try to rely on it, and then it does sort of backfire a little bit. I've got to say, my 52 in chemistry and in biochemistry, I was so proud. They were my absolute lowest marks ever, but man, I just wanted to get through for nutrition. So I appreciate what you're saying. Yeah,
we had that in our first year back in the optometry school, lens systems and ray physics. And that was the first paper I got back. It was one of these things that's an open book exam, but of course that means they can ask you anything. And yeah, that was the first result I got back. I think I got C+, and I was like, oh, good, I've passed everything.
Yeah.
through the next year. If I got through that, I've got through everything else.
Yeah. So then, Ryan, you've got obviously this passion for sort of science and learning and maybe problem solving. When did you get into metabolism in a more sort of focused way? Because obviously you would have studied it in parts of your study, but when did it become part of the thing that you do and the thing that you think about?
Yeah, I think the first seed was sowed when I was doing that pre-honours paper. I can't remember his name, but it was in Otago. I wrote a proposal to study ghrelin signalling and ghrelin not ghrelin. Leptin resistance. Yeah. And so the whole idea of that you could be resistant to a hormone was there. and then I carried on for 4 years of optometry, just like trying to get through the bloody thing. And I sort of had always struggled about half an hour into my rugby training. I'd be incredibly fit, but then I get stomach cramps. And then somewhere around about the third or fourth year I was in Auckland, one of the trainers said, try paleo, throw away the bread. And like that, I could train, no worries, stop stomach cramps and all that sort of stuff.
Interesting.
But I didn't really associate the gluten-free type thing. And then come the end of uni, there's, trips to McDonald's, there's a bakery, a bar now that has amazing croissants and stuff like that. and then moved to Christchurch, playing rugby again, focusing on. I had a year off rugby, so I had to focus on nutrition and strength and all that sort of stuff, and noticing these things about that. And then somewhere around 2016, Keegan Smith started talking about the ketogenic diet and also these inflammatory processes that is sort of starting to link with rugby league players and injuries. And he was sort of bringing in paleo concepts, ketogenic concepts. Of course, the prove it stuff started to happen. And again, Keegan introduced me to that, the exogenous ketones. And so I started looking into that, started seeing links with epilepsy, diabetes, concussion. I'd had concussions 13, 17, 20, and then I ended up in 2017 having a major one. Broken my nose as well. So just all been a little bit of a geek, just trying to find edges and things, being a bit of a battler in rugby, playing on the cusp between Division 1 and reserves. I tried to play sevens for Southland a couple of times and was non-javelin reserve twice, tried to play sevens for Canterbury, went to a tournament in the Mount, but then was non-javelin reserve again the next week. So I was always on that cusp of things and trying to find edges and things, and metabolism, sports nutrition was always sort of there. And then at the end of that 2016 in August, we had a conference in Queenstown, and Grant Schofield.
For work,
yeah. So it's called Snow Vision, and Grant Schofield presented two really awesome talks. So I was already exploring this ketogenic thing, and that was kind of like, oh yeah, there's something here. And he's talked about Warburg effect and all that sort of stuff. So that's where I, every spare moment of my day, if I had gaps or 10 minutes here or there, I'd start reading papers on all this stuff to try and understand what is it about metabolism and diabetes, what is it about metabolism and concussion. And so that was somewhere around there, end of 2016.
Yeah. And were you was that when you begun to make the link with the work that you do, or was that all part of it as you were sort of reading, or did that sort of come later?
I think it was part of it, because I just remembered I had another concussion and when I was in that sevens team in Canterbury. And so when I came to the Waikato, I wanted to help people with post-concussion syndrome, because there's a lot of behavioural optometry things. Your focusing and your pupils are very linked between your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And so convergence and focus tend to fail, especially in people who are long-sighted. They all of a sudden especially lose the ability to read, and also if they'll lose the ability to see far away even though they're long-sighted, just because their eye muscle can't constrict anymore and change their lens to focus, their long distance goes blurry as well.
Is that because of a sympathetic nervous system response?
Yeah, sympathetic overload, yeah.
Oh, wow. I saw that you wrote, actually, this is a little bit of a tangent and we'll get back to what we were talking about, but I saw you wrote an article about teenagers and their stress response and what you're seeing. And I believe this was in October 2021, and that was sort of it was, even though you're in the Waikato, you would have been on the fringes of the Auckland lockdown, I think at the time, maybe.
Yeah, and it's been amazing this year not seeing it so much. But then last week I had two cases of it. And I was like, when were you studying? When did you finish exams? I'm like, just a couple of weeks ago. How long has this been? Like, about 3 or 4 weeks. I'm like, oh yeah, good. Looked at their pupils. Like the girl that I had last week, her pupils were like 9 millimeters, which is massive. They constricted down to maybe 6, which is still big, and then bounced straight back out to 9 millimeters. I was like, oh yeah. And she was like a tiny bit long-sighted, and so without her glasses, she was getting headaches and struggling to see. Put the glasses on, she was fine, but she couldn't read. Give her extra power, she could read again. And then you can do this thing where you introduce power to activate the muscle and power to relax the muscle, and both ways. Her muscle was really locked in place, so every time she would change her focal length, she'd lose focus for a period of time, and that was really frustrating. Yeah.
So is that resolve over time when the sympathetic nervous system response is able to switch off more naturally?
Yeah.
Along with the exercises? Yeah.
So you can sort of train the visual system or train the nervous system, and so I spoke about you can do these jump ductions, which are focusing on a near text or like your numbers on your watch or something on your phone, and then focusing on something far away. So like for me here, I could look at the little Samsung on my microphone and then look across and see Samsung on the TV and just jump back and forth. Now, mine's quite dynamic at the moment, but post-concussion, I might be really slow on one or both of those. And so you can do that. And then I'm also suggesting that they get outside, maybe do something like yoga or Pilates or, and then I sort of mentioned we might want to do something extreme like a cold immersion or a sauna or jump in the lake, get in nature, get sleep, consider taking some fish oil for a period of time, make sure your nutrition is, low loading, the whole like high protein, slow cooked, bioavailable type stuff. Yeah.
So all of those tactics, they are working on resolving the stress response and calming the central nervous system, and also the out in nature. Because I've seen research where they've talked about the modern environment, because we're in these, four walls, for want of a better term. We're in front of screens, either there or close to us. We no longer see many horizons or different depths. And so your strategy to help someone if they have eye issues that are stress related, is it to work on stress but also change their visual sort of settings?
Yeah. And so something really basic, one of the basic rules that probably applies to every single person is the 20-20-20 rule. And so that's American, 20 feet. You want to look beyond 20 feet every 20 minutes and blink 20 times. And especially when you're on a screen, you're blinking at about 40% of your normal rate. When you're reading a book, you're reading at about 60% of your normal blink rate. And so that's the other side of it, is like, but that just gives you a sort of a time frame to like look far away and blink 20 times.
Yeah. That's such a great tip. Okay, so back to then I'm sorry, because I led us down that tangent, which I think is really useful actually. So you became more interested in how metabolism sort of affected the eye. And do you eat, like Huberman said in a podcast, that the eyeballs are the only part of the brain that we can see. Is that what you learned? Is that how it is?
Yeah, I don't know if I learnt that, but I definitely felt that. Like doing embryology and seeing like brain outcrop and make an eyeball. We do embryology in biomed, and then we did embryology in optometry. And I think because I'd done that loop around with anatomy, it landed. And then same with like nervous tissue and physiology and anatomy. Again, I just sort of saw it that way, that it's like a brain thing. And like, I think it's 4 of the cranial nerves are involved with the eye. And so again, it's like that brainstem interaction, and there's lots of decisions that are made in the retina before even going to the brain, and then lots of those cranial nerve decision making that just sort of bounce back and forth from the brainstem without even going to higher function. Sort of for higher function neural activity with vision, it's going all the way to the occipital lobe and then up and over, and it swaps over, it splits into vertical and parts of it. And so it's a lot of so when you do a visual field, you can sort of pinpoint if there's a defect in it, where along the visual pathway there's, say, a stroke or an injury. And so, there's a lot of neurophysiology going on in the course. And it was really funny in zoology talking about Schrodinger's cats and the experiments they did where they closed the eyelids of cats and looked at the brain function, and then going into optometry and then being retold it again. That was really helpful for me.
Yeah, for sure.
Again in optometry, because I was sort of playing sport all the time. I was a bit of a battler in that as well, sort of just below the B+, so I didn't quite get the honours out of the 4 years. But learning something twice was really helpful, and I actually ended up getting an A+ in the neuro visual physiology paper, and it was just like one of my proud moments.
Oh, totally. And you know what? It's that repetition, eh?
Yeah.
Like I love, and there are so many things in my everyday life which I listen to and then hear it again in a different context or said a different way, and over time you just solidify an idea or a thought or whatever it is. So then it is just much more, you know it so much more, I think. Yeah,
and I was retelling my colleague Jagger Lalu on Monday night, how one of our sort of skills that we did in the anatomy degree was to label the optic nerve of a mice and then, do the cranial sections. And so I'd already had that visualization of the pathways. So to then reach optometry and think about this as part of the brain was, I don't know, that probably developed why I think about it the way I do.
Yeah, nice. So Ryan, can we do a bit of a 101 as to the really common eye conditions that people see, and then how their prevalence rates or how that might have increased over time, and then what some of the risk factors are? Because some of these conditions I see a bit in the science literature and related to diet and lifestyle, but for others they might only know them in the context of, well, my grandmother had glaucoma, so and that's about it. So can we let's start with glaucoma. So what is it? Who's at risk? And are these kind of things increasing?
Yeah, so glaucoma has that genetic link. It's thought of quite closely with Alzheimer's. And so again, that sort of type 3 diabetes message rings true in my head. I have it on both sides of my family. So I'm got a pretty high risk profile. I ended up being short-sighted, so I have an increased risk profile. And it's a progressive loss of nerves from the eye. And originally they sort of saw the association with eye pressure. And there's a form of it which is called angle closure glaucoma, where the iris, the colour part of the eye, and the cornea, the clear part of the eye, stick to each other. And so the fluid that fills the eye can't get out, and the eye pressure raises, and that rapidly kills the nerve. So they still haven't really explained exactly what happens there, whether it's the pressure onto the nerve, pinching the nerve, stopping the perfusion of the nerve, or something. But they will relieve that adhesion between the cornea and the iris. Often all they need to do is put a hole into the iris, and the iris will bow back, and that drainage channel opens up, and the eye pressure is relieved, and everything's fine. Or there's sort of primary open angle glaucoma, or even and that's where the pressure's raised and slowly they lose their nerve. And there's also normal tension glaucoma. So it seems to be sort of a relative to the individual type thing. And the way they treat it is they try and lower the eye pressure, ideally by 30%. So when we're assessing glaucoma, we're looking at that optic nerve. Is it a funny shape? We're measuring eye pressure. Is it higher than 21? That's a greater risk. And do you have a family history of it? That's a sort of a 5 or 6 times increased risk. Do you have conditions like blood pressure, migraines, Raynaud's disease, inflammation? Are you taking steroid medications? They all sort of, there's the big cluster. So we compare the optic nerves over time. If we see any change, if we see little hemorrhages at the edge of it, then we'll do further testing. So we do a visual field, which is a neurophysiological test. It's a subjective test to see the sensitivity of the peripheral vision, because that's what goes first. We map the optic nerve head with a thing called ocular coherent tomography, OCT, and that bounces light off the layers in the retina, and the computer program separates out all the layers and gives you these beautiful pictures and compares those to a database of people and tries to fit you within what are called aged matched normals. So yeah, a group of the population, what's their sort of distribution of nerve thicknesses. You've got to sort of apply the individual to the comparison, and then also looking at it over the time helps. And then you also measure the thickness of the ganglion cells, which come from all through the retina, and then they arrive at that optic nerve. And again, you look at the relative thickness of that based on the age. So yeah, catching that is basically having an eye exam. If you were noticing that part of your visual field is gone, you've probably lost about 50% of your nerves, and you're probably no longer legal to drive.
And does that, and because of you mentioned that, it's related to blood pressure and inflammation and things like that, are we seeing increased prevalence in numbers of people being diagnosed with glaucoma?
I think it's somewhere between 6 and 8%.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think it's just a pocket of the population. Yeah, I don't know how much it's increasing in terms of the percentage of the population, but yeah, that's been the number for a little while. Yeah, I've only been in the career for 8 years and 4 years of uni, so yeah. Probably have to ask my boss who's been doing it for 40 odd years.
Yeah, no, this is good.
Or 50 years actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and what about retinopathy? Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the one I hate seeing, because it's largely, I don't know if you'd say completely preventable in type 1 diabetics, but we've got a couple of like type 1s in their 90s who have immaculate retinas, and you kind of go, I don't think there's an excuse.
Yeah, interesting.
But you don't live their life, so that's probably a little bit facetious to say. But
I appreciate what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, but and I sort of said to you, and I said to my mate Jagger on the weekend, I'd love for the type 1 grit cohort to release what their retinas look like and track that group. And then type 1 grit.
Type 1 grit, yep.
Yep. Who runs that?
It would be RD
Dykman. Yeah, and who ran the paper in 2018? Lipton?
Oh, Unwin? Was it Unwin?
No. Is it
Ludwig?
Upton? Ludwig? Yeah, it might have been Ludwig.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd love for them to track their diabetic retinopathy.
Yeah.
And then with short-sightedness, I'd love for the type 1 grit to be tracked on that as well, because there's a high prevalence of short-sightedness and myopia in Asia and in India as well, and the carbohydrate intake of those populations are obviously very high. And when I think end of 2018, we had a conference around myopia control, so trying to prevent short-sightedness from happening, because it's sort of estimated that about 20% of New Zealand has short-sightedness, and any level of short-sightedness increases your risk of macular degeneration, glaucoma, and retinal detachments, and increases the onset of cataract, which is hazing of the lens. And that, I think they're expecting Asia to be about 50% pretty shortly, and it's climbing worldwide. And so the question was raised at this conference by one of the guys in the States that maybe there's a diet aspect to this. And I sort of said to him, well, what would be really fascinating to compare is a standard cohort of type 1 diabetes with, A1Cs 60, maybe even to 100 in those teenage years, and high doses of insulin, versus type 1 grit that have HbA1c's in the 30s, and they're using low amounts of insulin and probably more like a regular pancreas function. It'd be fascinating to look at incidence of that. So the trouble is that, with a cohort of 400 people, 20% is not that many people, but, hey, they might have a lower percentage. They might be 10%, whereas a regular cohort might be higher, might be 30%. So that'd be a fascinating question that I'd love to see answered.
Have you written to them?
No, I've thought about it. Yeah.
There you go. There's your next step. So what is it about the blood sugar control that impacts on the eye, Ryan?
So fascinating. This morning I was trying to find a last month, must be macular degeneration awareness, and one of the Australasian publications had about the impact of fasting. There's three rat models, which 2 of them showed a reduction in the accumulation of the waste product in the retina, which is called drusen, that leads to damage of the light-reacting cells called photoreceptors, which is what macular degeneration is. It's a loss of those. And so they saw an improvement in these 2 rat models through fasting, and then the 3rd rat model didn't show any benefit. So a group in Korea have done a retrospective study where they've looked at people based on a food frequency questionnaire who skipped breakfast, and that reduced and had macular degeneration, and it reduced their progression of macular degeneration. And when I was in Hawke's Bay, suggested it to some people because, macular degeneration, there's nothing really to do. It's kind of hope for the best situation. There's no real treatments. So we suggest to people they avoid processed seed oil. If they're smoking, stop smoking, and try consume low inflammatory foods. The idea is fish, green and gold. So oily fish, green leafy vegetables, eggs and raw nuts. Avoid the processed seed oils. I then sort of said, and maybe fasting helps. And this person's drusen was pretty bad. And I actually observed on that OCT, the scan, these build-ups reduce. And so there's an N of 1.
But still something. Yeah,
it's something that I've talked about with Grant Schofield about doing a Masters in Public Health with. And again, it's one of those things that you're like, one day.
Totally. So that's super interesting. What is it about the diet foods that they need to avoid that would impacts negatively on their health in your opinion, or from your research or whatever?
Yeah, it's merely opinion. And so again, that's where having looked at cellular anatomy is quite handy to think about it. So this layer that surrounds the retina, called the retinal pigmented epithelium, is kind of a specialized immune cell. So the reason why it's pigmented is it's full of melanin to absorb all the energy, that light energy, and this massive reaction that goes on in the photoreceptors. So it's an energy sink. And then outside of that is this massive intertwined capillary layer called the choriocapillaris. And so it's just this web. And so they are basically taking all that heat out of the retina so that your eyeball doesn't fry, basically. And at the macula, you have a really high concentration of these photoreceptors, which are the cones and very sensitive to light. That's where you get your fine detail vision. And so it's a massive sort of energy sapping area, and there's no vascular supply. So all of the energy needs to be taken away out the bottom, out through this pigmented layer. And when a photoreceptor reacts to light, it changes its membrane, and the RPE gives the retinol back to the photoreceptor and cleaves off the used up segment of this photoreceptor. So it's kind of gobbling up the used up retina as it goes, kind of like a macrophage, and then it sort of excretes the waste of the retina out into that choriocapillaries and through the basement membrane. And in macular degeneration, that kind of doesn't happen, and you get this build up of these drusens, and then they create inflammation, further inflammation and damage. And so if you're thinking about it of like the immune cycle and induction of inflammation, so the inflammatory cycle, induction of inflammation driven by omega-6 and resolution of inflammation driven by omega-3, and you're consuming processed seed oils at sort of a 40-to-1 ratio instead of, cold pressed oils or lard, ghee, butter, that sort of stuff, sort of 3 or 4-to-1, then you're driving this excessive cleaving of the photoreceptor, perhaps. You're perhaps building the photoreceptor cell wall with higher omega-6 and omega-3, making it more volatile. And because it's such a high energy reaction, that volatility creates excessive reaction oxygen species and more inflammation. And, that's the sort of idea around why that food could be a problem. On the flip side, the lutein and zeaxanthin that you're getting from green leafy vegetables, or the choline that you're getting from eggs, might be dampening that inflammatory cycle. And then the omega-3 fatty acids are creating these nice heat-stable sort of, and what the membrane's supposed to be made out of, and allowing that sort of resolution of this build-up. So that's kind of my interpretation of why it might work. The information comes from 2 studies called the AREDS-2 study, age-related eye disease study. The first iteration, they sort of found beta-carotenoids in the zinc. You spoke about that in your questions. And then they found that beta-carotene increased the risk of lung cancer in people who had smoked.
Yeah, it was high dose, really high dose synthetic, I think. Because at higher doses, those antioxidants become pro-oxidant, I think is what they thought. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, smoking, like most things, being sort of 4 times risk factor for macular degeneration.
Yes.
It probably wasn't that good to do it. So AREDS-2, they adapted beta-carotene to lutein and zeaxanthin, and they've just recently reviewed it, and it hadn't increased the risk for lung cancer. So that was where that comes from. So lifestyle-wise, fish, green and gold, and then there's a supplement that's lutein, zeaxanthin and zinc.
Yeah. Okay. So, a comment, and then I'll ask a question first. That supplement that you just mentioned, can people purchase a supplement that is zeaxanthin, lutein, and zinc?
Yeah. So most of them are called Macu something, like Macu Shield, Macu Vision, Macu Tech.
Which one's the best?
They should be AREDS-2 formula. It's a standard formula. And so that's what you need to look for, AREDS-2. We've got clinicians at work. I quite like Macu Shield and Macu Tech as well, because they're 1 tablet twice a day. Blackmore's Macu Vision, unfortunately, I think is 2 in the morning, 2 in the night, and then another 2 lutein with it. They didn't join the 2 together, which was a bummer. So that's why I less like that one, because it's like too many supplements to take. But yeah, they're all doing the same thing. It's just the way that they come type thing. Yeah.
And who should think about taking the zinc, that Macu Shield?
Yeah, and it's kind of like, if it's in your family history, probably take it.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you've got any drusen, so again, if you're having an eye exam and the optometrist points out drusen in there, it's probably a good idea to take an AREDS-2, or at least consider the fish, green and gold type thing. Maybe start implementing some form of fasting. Like I said, there's kind of no real treatment, but there's ways to help, and it's probably going to help in other aspects of your health.
Yeah, sure. Hey, Ryan, with the fasting, how that sort of depletes the drusen, does exercise do the same thing?
Yes, yeah, and so in our sort of handout from Macular Degeneration New Zealand, it talks about exercise, and interestingly, it talks about low GI carbohydrates as well. Whatever that means, but I think they're more getting at sort of whole food rather than processed food. Yeah,
nice. And do you think that insulin has a role to play within that, the diet stuff that you were talking about? And the reason I ask is because I was just talking to Marty Kendall this morning about his Optimizing Nutrition course. Do you know Marty? Have you heard of him?
No.
Oh my God, you must have him on the Stag Raw podcast.
For sure.
I will send you a few of his links. He is amazing. And he talks about diet from an energy toxicity perspective. And of course, when you eat a
who did you say, sorry?
modern diet, Marty Kendall.
No, I'm thinking of Matt Phillips.
Yes, no, I spoke to him actually also quite recently, who speaks around the same stuff.
Yeah.
And just the idea that, it's less about the pro-inflammatory nature of omega-6s, although having said that, if they're going to destabilize that membrane, then they will have a particular role there. But that people overconsume them because they're part of that modern diet. So, and then of course, a lot of the foods that have the omega-6s are also high in starch and sugar, so they're going to elicit that sort of insulin response. Do we know much about insulin's role?
No, it's and I always think about like insulin, like growth factor. Yeah, I'm always like curious, like what's happening there. Again, the sort of obesity model that there was more and larger blood vessels in that choroid layer. I was like, that's interesting. Wonder what that means, or why that happens if you're obese. Why are there more and bigger blood vessels around the retina? I was like, that's fascinating. Yeah, I just read it today and I was like, wonder what that means. Wonder what the root of that is. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Ryan, sort of a slight tangent, but you were talking about the retina, the cones behind the eyes, and things like that. Is there any link between people who have vision problems and circadian rhythm?
That specifically is part of the short-sightedness story. So, I did a summer studentship while I was there, and we looked at light exposure. And so there's a way to induce short-sightedness in chicks where you occlude one of their eyes and they grow really fast. And then we had different light treatments and saw that the growth of the eye was less when there was more light. Sort of a crossover with that study is they put light meters on kids in a large array of schools in Auckland, and again they sort of saw a trend towards less short-sightedness. There's a comparative study between Chinese immigrants in Taiwan and Sydney, and again the Sydney children had less short-sightedness than the Taiwan children. The assumption was that recent immigrants would still have a similar diet, similar educational aspirations, and similar studying times, and just that sort of outdoorsness of Sydney versus the indoorsness of Taiwan probably had an effect. While I was at uni, they sort of thought about it like the induction of sleep and the sleep period probably has an effect. Like Matthew Walker and Huberman as well talk about those, 2 a.m. sort of flips between deep sleep and then more rapid eye movement sleep. And so, that's what we're always sort of talking about with our kids is like get outside in the morning in the middle of the day, give you that real massive peak of light. And then it's hopeful that when you get into bed, you fall asleep and you have those good hours of deep sleep, and then you can enjoy those 4 or 5 hours of rapid eye movement dream sleep and feel refreshed. And of course, then there's the whole like depression side of things and serotonin side of things. One of our treatments for myopia is applying atropine, so blocking acetylcholine, and that stops the growth of the eye. And it's like, okay, so what's that got to do with sleep and sleep hormones and, these, good nutrition and serotonin and all that sort of stuff. And so it's just so much crossover with all these types of things and light and sleep and circadian rhythms. And then again, back to glaucoma, we often get people to run a sleep study, sleep apnea and glaucoma, put people on a CPAP, they reverse their diabetes and their glaucoma stops.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's not an island, eh? The eyes aren't an island.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So it's all, I mean, everything is connected. So you mentioned myopia, so that's
Short-sightedness. Yeah.
Short-sightedness.
So,
okay.
Yeah, there's real risky zone for short-sightedness is sort of 8 to 12, or, as young as possible, but up to the age of 12. And a typical myopia progression is sort of 0.25 per year. So if we're getting an 8-year-old come in and they're already -1, and that continues to progress until they're 25, well then, that they'll maybe be going along at 0.5 a year, and so that they've got 15 more years, so they could end up being -7.5. And so when you sort of get above -6, the risk of retinal detachment is massive. It's something like odds ratio of 30 times type stuff. -3 is only about 4, and then above -4 is about 12 or so.
Yeah.
And then at a recent conference we had, the professor from Auckland, John Phillips, was talking about how when it came to macular degeneration, -3 had about a 12 odds ratio. And we all kind of went in the room like, oh, and he hammered home the point. It's like, you guys think that as a -4, that's a high risk for retinal detachment, but as a -3, that's a high, that's the same risk for macular degeneration, which is potentially going to cause blindness. We really need to get on top of this thing. So John was part of a study group that designed a soft contact lens that you can see clearly through, but at the same time it's projecting defocus, so a focal length in front of the retina. So you're seeing clearly, but at the same time you're getting a focal length in front of the retina, and that slowed the growth of the eye by 50%. So instead of that child ending up as -7, they end up as -3.5, closer to that lower risk of retinal detachment, lower odds ratio, of macular degeneration and glaucoma. Atropine has about the same, 50 to 60%, depending on the dosage.
What is atropine? Is it some medication for?
Yeah, it's a acetylcholine blocker. And so we use it diagnostically at 1%. And so that when we're trying to get the real focal length of a young eye, usually in the case of their long-sighted, so their focal length's behind the eye, because the lens in their eye is so flexible and their eye muscle doesn't have to flex much to then move the lens to be more round, bring the focus forward onto the retina and then see clearly. So we apply, we don't actually use atropine for this often, but you could use atropine or a thing called cyclopentalate, and it blocks the focusing muscle. So their focusing muscle is completely relaxed, like that person that's had a concussion or is stressed. Their focusing muscle, their parasympathetic, is not working. And we can measure the true focal length of the eye. Now that drop at 0.05% was shown to slow myopia progression by 60%, and we can even use it at 0.02 or 0.01. And this is sort of a hot debate in optometry at the moment. Like, what do you do? Because myopia progression seems to happen faster, younger. So, and you're doing less reading and things like that. So maybe using the higher dose is better earlier. But then there's the whole thing of like lowest effective dose. And so, yeah, there's a bit of debate around, do you start with 0.01 or with the lowest side effects, or do you start with 0.05, have the greatest effect? But maybe 0.01 would have been enough. So, yeah, that's that. And so, but yeah, that sort of parasympathetic blocking drop does that for things. And then we also have a hard contact lens that you sleep in, orthokeratology. And what that does is it flattens the cornea for you so you can see clearly straight ahead, wherever. But to do that, it moves the cells on the cornea, the epithelium, and creates steepness in the periphery. So a bit like that soft contact lens, you're looking through a clear vision, but it's creating this defocus in front of the retina just to slow the growth of the retina the other way. And yeah, so that, and now we've also got some glasses that are applying that effect as well. So yeah, that's our sort of it's really important because, like I said, it's about 20% of the population, and it has these massive risks for later in life. But it's quite a hard conversation to be communicating to an 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old and their parents. And then you talk about these sort of like risk ratios and like, what does that mean? And those things are potential blindness when you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s. And it's
That's a lifetime away.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, yeah. And what about the diet message? Like, how well do people receive the idea that a crappy modern diet that they've been eating is not doing their eyes any favor?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like the cognitive dissonance of the whole thing. Yeah, like it's interesting when we do the diabetic photo screening, and it's a much shorter appointment as well, which also makes it difficult. And I've run into the odd speed bump every now and again of people not quite willing to hear it or what it means. But you learn with all of those types of things. But it's like everything you say, you get lots of head nodding, and then you get the sort of but. Yeah. And I think it's a easier conversation with the person that has macular degeneration and is noticing their vision deteriorate than it is to be like, and you need to talk to your family about this. Or like the case of a 19, 11-year-old with short-sightedness, get outside, get good sleep quality, try be away from your device 2 hours before you go to bed in a perfect world, and that'll mean you have a better sleep. And they're just looking at you like, what? And you're like, and don't eat too much sweets and processed food. And they're like, oh, come on, man.
No, I know. I have the same conversation with children and their parents, and the parents roll their eyes and the kids are like, as if, and the parents are rolling their eyes, not because they don't think it's not because they don't think it's valid, but because they recognize that they've probably got a battle on their hands to instigate a lot of these changes. But Ryan, you make such a great point. Like, it's the same with anything that we come across with regards to health. Our eyes are responding the same way that our bodies respond in an environment of energy toxicity, of a sedentary lifestyle, of too much screen time. Like, we've spent like a slither of our evolution in this environment, yet health is going downwards because of it. And our eyes are another example of that.
Exactly right. Yeah. it's and it's really funny for me and my job, because like I'm telling someone to get outside and I'm in a room that has no windows.
Oh no, yeah.
I always say it's the most ironic job in the world. Like, we flash bright lights in people's eyes, we block their focus, we ask them when there's something blurry and they're there to see. And we're like, and by the way, get outside. And they're like, well, where's your windows? I was like, I've been outside this morning, and every lunchtime, well, not every lunchtime, but because it's been raining so much, but most lunchtimes I'm getting outside, and my breaks, like, I just sort of duck out the back door and get some sunshine and just try to, remind myself it's daytime.
Yeah, totally. So, Ryan, what about blue light blocking glasses? So, I know, because I have a thing where I understand that a lot of the glasses that people might wear in everyday life are in fact blocking blue light that they might need in order to get that correct sort of circadian or hormone response. So, what's going on? What's going on with all of our Specsavers glasses?
Yeah, no, it's not just them.
Sorry, Specsavers.
Yeah, Boots Eye Care in the UK got sued because they claimed preemptively that it might prevent macular degeneration. And it's a bit of the case that there's no evidence.
Yeah.
And so you can't make those claims type thing, which is tough. And I'm of the opinion that it's not doing nothing, but the effect is often over-prescribed or over-claimed. And, there's a lot of verging on charlatanism with like, oh, you got to block out harmful blue light. But light is a spectrum of things, and like in the daytime when you're outside, the same people that are saying get outside during the middle of the day, it's like, what's the spectrum of light during the middle of the day? And when it comes to this myopia progression, that middle of the day stuff, and then those reds at the end of either end of the day are really important. So it's not isolated. But I think if you're someone that needs to do work in the evening, having blue blocking lens as opposed to just the regular spectrum of lens is not doing nothing. Now I've got flux on my computer, so everything's quite yellow right now. I sort of, actually I can show you. I've tuned my home button to be the shortcut for 3 times, and I've got my screen to be like completely fluxed out in the red spectrum. So it's really boring to look at your phone as well.
Yeah, actually, it would be. Yeah,
so
TV is actually quite boring watching it like that, to be fair.
Yeah, so I used to have grayscale, and I still sort of felt that like white light was quite sharp. And then my mate said, "Oh, try it completely red." And so I do that. So yeah, like I think even Matthew Walker's changed his mind a little bit on evening light exposure. That he's not so convinced it's as bad as they initially felt. But I do think it's like it's not a non-zero thing. It's like
yeah. I wonder, because I've said this a few times, is that, I wonder if there are people who are more sensitive to it than others. But what about, Ryan, in the middle of the day, people have got their prescription glasses and they are blue light blocking, like they block the blue light. Like, is that a potential
Nigel
problem?
Beach. Do you know Nigel Beach?
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, we have this little bit of a laugh that, because especially when I go to one of his seminars, and he talks about, you don't need your sunglasses to go from your car, so your house to your car in the morning, and then your car to your office in the morning.
Yes.
Or to duck out for that coffee. Like that little bit of light is probably really good, particularly if you've been in the office. But the caveat to that is, if you're playing cricket or golf or are in an orchard or a builder or a roofer, it's probably quite a good idea to wear some sunglasses and
to protect your eyes,
and
right?
protect your eyes. Like,
yeah.
There's a change on the eye called a pinguicula, where the white part of your eye then has a jelly on top called the conjunctiva. People will know that from conjunctivitis, where you get the pussy red eye, and that conjunctiva continues to sort of exceed across the cornea, and it's called a pterygium. And the surgery for that is they basically peel it off and get a graft from under your eyelid and stick it on. And to a lesser extent, there's a thing called pinguicula, which is, and often it's people on next to their nose on the white of the eye. It becomes all rough and raised, and they can get quite dry. So that's straight sun damage. And then basal cell carcinomas, what's that? Squamous cell carcinomas. They're pretty common in New Zealand, and one of the ophthalmologists in Hawke's Bay, Liz Insall, she had some images in the latest sort of textbook we have, Kansky, and she was telling us about, she does a thing called a Y suture, where she will have to remove the melanoma and create quite a section away from the eyelid, and then she'll just basically grab the cheek and put it up to the lid. And then she said, and I also have this thing called the T suture, where I have to take, into the cheek away, and I basically grab from the jaw, pull it up, suture it in place, and then grab that skin again and pull it up to the eyelid. And she was showing us photos of that, and it's like, there's definitely a place for sunglasses, especially in New Zealand.
Yeah, totally. So it's finding that balance between not blocking all of that
it's like
spectrum
safe sun,
of light.
isn't it?
But yeah, it's the safe sun, totally. It's the same with being out in the sun. Like, you don't want to burn, but you need that. Ideally, you'd get that exposure.
And Nigel's sort of argument as well, which I completely agree with, is we're sort of so into this sympathetic zone, and if you've got your sunglasses on, then your pupils dilated. And so are you driving that more sympathetic state by, having lower light conditions, and so your pupils are wider, and, that sort of sympathetic tone's being driven a little bit to pull the iris open a bit more, engage that sympathetic muscle, engage a sympathetic tone. Is that sort of creating a little bit of feedback? And so that's why you're so glare sensitive, because you're more into that sympathetic. Whereas if you have your sunglasses off, your pupil's going to constrict, and then that's going to enhance your parasympathetic tone and maybe help bring your levels down, your levels of anxiety and stuff like that down. So, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a good thought experiment, and there is a section of the world that looks at light therapy for, muscle tone, things like infrared saunas and green lights and blue lights and stuff like that for helping out with conditions. And it's not doing nothing, but it's also not mainly done.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So, Ryan, then sort of to finish up, in your work, as you sort of see people and you see the different research coming through and just the research that sort of exists in the mechanisms, is it correct to say that we can delay the progression of most eye disorders that people might experience despite their genetic basis?
I think it's low carb down under from about 2017. There's a really good, that fish green and gold concept gets talked about. Unfortunately, I can't remember the ophthalmologist's name, but yeah, he talks about that fish green and gold can basically eliminate your genetic risk factors. Like I said about with short-sightedness, we have optical treatments, but that being outside in the middle of the day, that good sleep, good diet, good exercise can help to mitigate short-sightedness. Glaucoma, again, good activity, good health conditions, blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, not smoking should mean that you don't get glaucoma. So, if you're not preventing it, you're mitigating it. It's that whole thing. It's not nothing.
Yeah. And finally, in your profession, Ryan, are there many people that think in the way that you do about that we're all just one big complex system, or are there people who wouldn't necessarily agree with some of the stuff?
Oh, I think if you probed a lot of people, they'd go down that road. Like I said, we start off with optometry looking at embryology and neurophysiology. So, but I've sort of been writing about the diet and stuff since 2017, and I haven't really had the bite. I sort of see from doing diabetic photo screening and seeing bad cases of diabetes that, like, as optometrists, we're in one of the most privileged situations to see the blood vessels. We don't have to chop anyone open to see them. The retina is the most at risk of diabetes. Something like half of the blood supply runs through the retina in the space of 40 minutes. And so if that's these inflamed red blood cells because of diabetes, then you're going to get damage to those retinal vessels. And I think there's an optometrist in the States that's sort of talking about low carb and things like that. Australian of the Year in 2020 was ophthalmologist James Mikki, and he's been hard on the diabetes reversal news that came out in Australia last year. I think him, Ray Kelly, and Michael Mosley did a series of TV programs on SBS in Australia.
Yeah.
And like, you talk with ophthalmologists, and they are aware of the effects of diabetes, but I think there's still a lot of the medical model blocking the idea that, hey, let's go back a step and think about it as metabolism and reversal. And let's look at glaucoma and all the associations and think healthy lifestyle. What's healthy lifestyle? Diet and exercise.
Yeah.
And the same with myopia. It's like, what's restrictive to myopia? Getting outside. What are you doing outside? Being healthy. What's your mood like? Being good. What are you sleeping like? Being good. And so that means healthy mood, less myopia. So, I think the conversation's slowly moving that way. Yeah. But I sort of see the industry gets caught up in the fact that at the end of the day, people get prescribed glasses, and so that sort of makes people forget about the health. Like, my mate Jugger sort of said to me on Monday, "You're a real medical retinal kind of guy," because he's into this ortho-K and myopia and what's called keratoconus. We didn't even talk about that, but yeah, there's so much.
Yeah. And so he said that to you, and you were like, "Yeah, that's me."
Yeah, I was like, "Yeah, probably is."
Yeah, actually, it is. Yeah, Ryan, awesome. Well, thank you so much. I never think about eyes only because right now, I don't wear glasses. I don't need them. I think about blue light in eyes, and I think about when I talk to clients that they wear blue light blocking glasses throughout the day and things like that. But I haven't really even considered that what I'm doing now, and I think about health and I think about the things I do and try in a health promoting way, but I've never thought that what I'm doing is protecting my eyes as well. And, I've never really given it much thought, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's been fascinating in Taupo. Like Glenn Davies is there, trying to reverse diabetes, and then I sort of see a lot of females come to the perspective that it looks like diabetes and hormones.
Yeah. And
I've been bringing up your name often. I'm like, well, if you want a similar but slightly more, female-centric idea, maybe check out Mikki. And so hopefully the odd person comes. And I remember referring people to Dr. Steve Joe back in the day, and when I saw him once, and he said, "Oh, you can have this consult for free. I've seen about 3 or 4 people from you." And I was like,
"Oh, amazing!"
I was like, "Oh, somebody listened, fantastic."
Yeah, that is really good. That's awesome. Yeah. So where can people find you, Ryan, and of course your podcast and your blog, which hasn't been updated in a while?
I just was writing one today. I was like, shit. I was listening to the guy Aaron Walsh on Tuesday. That's why I was in Auckland, and he said, something that's been really good is writing, and then writing helps you speak. And I was like, oh gosh, I've sort of started writing my blog, and then I moved into podcasts, and I've neglected the writing and the same, like writing articles for optometry publications. I need to get back to writing. So the blog is stagryan.co.nz. The podcast is the Stag Raw. It's on like 13 platforms. It's on YouTube. I'm quite active on Instagram at Ryan O'Connor NZ, and also at Stag Ryan. My Twitter's at Stag Ryan. But if you go to one platform, you'll find the others. So it's pretty broad and easy to track down.
That is brilliant, Ryan. And your podcast is great, and you have such a good array of guests. And of course, because we are both aligned in how we think about things, they speak my language, and I love it. So thank you so much for that. And any last tips or tricks or anything that you feel that people should know to end us on?
Things people should know. I already said the 20-20-20 rule.
I loved that. I loved the fish
green
the
gold.
Fish green and gold.
Neither of these are my original thoughts.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The supplement as well, I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, AREDS 2, we'll reiterate that one.
Yeah.
I think just basically think about eyes like you would your teeth, or you would an injury. Now, I know a lot of people get injured and they go to the doctor, and I wonder why. But like, if you've got an injury, you'd see a physio or an osteo. If you have something wrong with your teeth, you'd see a dentist. If you have something wrong with your pet, you see a vet. And if there's something up with your eyes, see an optometrist. And a bit like going to the dentist to make sure you don't have a filling, go to the optometrist and make sure you don't have one of these things. Also, just raise your level of awareness to think about, what are my risk factors? If you've never had that conversation with your family about glaucoma or macular degeneration, have that conversation, because it all of a sudden flips your risk profile. Same with short-sightedness. Are there people in your family that are short-sighted? Then your children might end up being short-sighted. And if you are short-sighted and you've got children, there's a big risk that your children will end up short-sighted. So, basically get an eye test and look at that, and hopefully it's like, cool, nothing to be done.
That's awesome. That's good. It is. It all just comes down to being informed about your health and everything that sort of goes along with that. It's all sort of just part of that, really, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and don't buy those just those $2 glasses from the warehouse just because you can't see anymore when you read. Actually, go and get your eyes tested.
They're not going to harm your eyes, but they're most of the time not ideal.
No, well, you're not going to learn a lot from everything else going on, are you?
Yeah, it might be glaucoma or macular degeneration where you can't read. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's a scary thought. Yeah. Ryan, thank you so much. You enjoy the rest of your evening, and I really enjoyed chatting to you and really appreciate the time you took.
Thanks so much, Mikki. You too. Alrighty, hopefully you enjoyed that, and definitely recommend checking out Stag Raw podcast.
Next week on the show, we wrap up 2022 with Dr. Cliff Harvey. He is a listener favourite. Until then, though, you can catch me over on Instagram and Twitter at Mikki Williden, on Facebook at Mikki Williden Nutrition, or head over to my website, mikkiwilliden.com, to book a one-on-one consultation, sign up to my recipe portal, or check out one of my meal plans. And you can also join the waitlist for Monday's Matter Shredruary edition, which is coming out this February 2023. All right, team, enjoy the rest of your week. See you later.